What's your perspective on Gen AI for security?
I'll start with something potentially controversial, and that is if you kind of listen to the sessions we had this morning and now with Chris, if you follow, some of the recent attacks, vulnerabilities, on the surface, nothing has changed. That's the controversial piece of it, right? Meaning the attackers are doing the same thing, right? They're doing phishing attacks. They're trying to find ways to elevate access, gain privilege access. They're trying to look for high risk identities, right? So on the surface, they're doing the exact same thing. Kind of that Chris slide at the end, and then the joke he made about how every vendor has the same slides. It's true, right? And it's the same slides for the last 20 years. Attacker gets in, could be inside a threat, could be outside, and then they found their way up to the let's call it the juicy data or the operational damage that they can create. The big shift, though, is they can do it much faster. The attack surface, and I'll talk about that more, has grown exponentially, and they commoditize it or democratized it, right? Meaning that things that they potentially needed, state funding or significant amount of investment, they can now do with a 20-minute chat GPT, right? And do that. So it's not polyformism. It's more, I can now do things much faster and much more sophisticated. Quickly, the second thing is really around, specifically in the identity space, it's around discovery, right? As the attack surface is growing and you have an exponentially larger number of identities now that you need to protect that have access to your data, whether it's human access, you're opening the doors to third party and so on, but also now AI identities and DevOps identities and so on. We need to make sure that we have visibility and discovery. That's the key change. Again, it's still about credentials and identities. And again, you heard it throughout the sessions. I believe, again, discovery is where you're going to see a lot of discovery and visibility of those identities is going to be a lot of innovation in that space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. And so we're looking at Gen AI's kind of helping the attacks become more sophisticated, refining things like phishing and smishing that Chris Hosking earlier talked about, and then the high risk identities. Earlier we heard that especially with AI models, we're going to see 10 to 20 to 1 non-human identities compared to the identities that we're used to securing. So that'll be really interesting. Yeah, perfect. Galit, what do you think?
So that's a fascinating era, right? Because things are evolving really quick. And when we talk about Gen AI, it takes us even quicker and faster. The interesting thing is that I think that when, most of us, when we think of Gen AI applications and Gen AI risks, so we immediately think of ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini. But there are nearly 10,000 applications that already embedded Gen AI capabilities within them. So actually it's everywhere. I mean, probably in the most common applications that you or your employees are using, they already embedded Gen AI capabilities. They change their T's and C's, and now they use your data to train on their models. So on one hand, it's great because we get, better solutions and tailored solutions to our needs. But now there's another risk to our data. The data of the company, of the organization, is also used to train the internal models. So on one hand, it may be disturbing or frightening, but I can tell you that the majority of those applications provide configuration policies. So there's something to do about it, okay? So as Barak said, discovery is very important. You have to know, but once you know, you can also mitigate it.
So we have this similar shadow IT problem that we've...
Exactly, that's the name to call it, shadow AI.
Shadow AI, right? Instead of, that makes a lot of sense too. So how do we discover these AIs so that we can actually implement security measures? That's the challenge that we're going to face today and in the future, for sure. Tim, you have anything to add? I know you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll take a little bit, kind of add on to what she said a little bit, but one of the things that we're looking at that we've seen kind of termed out there now, and I don't think it will stick, but there's this thing called AI SPM, really, which is kind of, we have CSPM, right? But then it's really just kind of expanding on that to understand where do you have services turned on for AI in your environment, in the cloud, and when are people using them that are not supposed to be using them, right? So it's kind of like an extension of CSPM and CIM, if you're familiar with cloud infrastructure entitlement management, and understanding who is using what in your cloud. So it's kind of an extension of both of those. And we're seeing a lot of people want to know that because, like you said, it's the shadow IT. Just like with anything else, people are going to turn the service on, they're going to try it out, but you need to know where it's on for a risk factor. I know I've heard a few people up here say that it is a risk inside of your environment. CISOs need to be concerned about it. They need to know how it's being used, where it's being used. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of people really want to understand that. They want to have a way to look inside of their environment, look for the AI services, who's using them and how they're being used.
And even how some of the GenAI systems are speaking to each other now too, right? I think we had a good example earlier where not only are we using to maybe a GenAI tool for discovering some sort of network anomalies, but also to do the communications and how we actually do some of those reporting on those.
Kind of like the attack path that was just shown before we got up here was like an attack path where you can see the GenAI services back and forth.
For sure. No, that makes sense. None of you have actually talked about anything cool that we're doing. Like, are we using GenAI for security versus just have to, worry about securing the technologies? Tim, why don't we start over there with you too?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we are. I think it's still very much being discovered how we're best going to use it. It's one of those things. If you think back, I've been doing security for a while, and a technology comes out, everybody gets excited about it. Everybody's implementing it slightly differently, trying to figure out exactly what it means. And I still think that's kind of where we're at with the GenAI phase. I think that we know that there's a lot of potential, but I think people are kind of throwing darts at a dartboard right now, trying to see what do customers actually want. Because I know that when we look at it from our platform, it's not just we don't want to do it to say that we're doing it per se, but it's how can we add GenAI to what we do and what we see that will add value to the customer or add value to the CISO, right? And so I think that we're still there. A couple of areas that I've seen this add value is, I would say, just some guidance, right? So GenAI has a lot of potential to help alleviate some of the work that maybe we don't want to do, or that it's repetitive, or we could use some people in our team to do other things that are more value add. And so that's really where we're starting to see, I think, GenAI really start to take off. So for example, remediation guidance. So for those, we all know that there's a cybersecurity shortage of out there for jobs. And so a lot of times we get these SOC analysts that are looking at alerts maybe, and they don't know what to do with the alerts. They get something related to MFA not turned on or ports open, and they're like, I have no idea why I should care about this port being open. I don't know what the port's for. And so being able to query that and understand, well, here's what it's for, here's exactly how you fix it, and here's what you should do about it, right? So just kind of getting some more context around that. And I'm also seeing that same type of thing on the code sec side. So with code security, being able to suggest fixes to source code vulnerability. So if you're doing SAST or SCA or what have you, being able to look at the code and say, look, I can see that you're doing this. You've got an injection error here. Here's how I would suggest you fix that. So those are just a couple of the things that I'm seeing right now.
Great. Yeah, and I think Caleb Sama even mentioned that earlier. He said, hey, let's get rid of menial tasks so we can focus on what's real. And Galit, you mentioned over 10,000 applications are already using GenAI.
Yeah.
Tell me there's some cool ones out there.
Okay, first of all, I think it's great, right? Because we get better value, quicker value, more customized, maybe tailored to our needs. And by the way, I think that the security domain is no different. So we see better value when those engines process alerts, or they can assess, they see behaviors, then they can alert on the abnormal events. So of course, it's great on many different aspects of our work, and the security solutions aren't different. I must say one thing, that in many cases we see that security teams would like to block the access because there are new risks. So if you don't have the tools to mitigate or to manage the risk, then in many cases, the first approach that we hear is, okay, let's block it. But it may be just counterintuitive, because blocking something that employees that want to get their job done may cause for walkarounds. So it's much it's much more difficult to discover. So I think that GenAI is here, and it's here to stay, and we'll see it in even more applications than, the 10,000 is just the start. We have classifications of more than 300,000 SaaS applications. So we understand that's the beginning of the road.
Yeah, they're all going to be doing it soon. Barack, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna add because I agree very much with Galit and Tim. I do agree that the biggest innovation will be around recommendations and being able to find anomalies in code and cloud and so on. So I'll take a little bit of a different angle again in the identity space. Where I think we're going to see a lot. We're already seeing a lot of innovation is around identity in general is very difficult to begin with, right? Anyone that experienced an identity management, a privilege access management, an IGA implementation, it is extremely difficult. I think this, and it's becoming even more difficult now because we have to manage this larger amount of identities. The biggest innovation we're going to see there is around the implementation side, right? How do we now implement an identity solution in a much faster way, right? In a more, again, automated, intelligent, faster, and of course, just to current attacks. Even things like approvals, right? Which is a nightmare for a lot of identity leaders, right? How do we approve access? Why do humans need to approve access? They usually just approve it, right? Without even looking at it. I think here you're going to see some more sophistication there. Two last things. You mentioned that already, where we're going to go towards machine identities. A lot around, right? It's related a little bit to the code sec, right? And how do we implement machine access, right? I think that will completely transform from how they get secret certificates and so on. And then the last thing, again, specifically in the identity and specifically in the privilege access space, we're going to see an innovation around what we call zero standing privileges or just-in-time access, right? Where I don't need to get a privilege account. Again, especially if you give AI or GenAI privilege access, we need to make sure it's given on the fly. We have the tech now to do it, right? And do the approval, the lifecycle management, not just the access. The actual account should not even be exist until you actually log in. And these are things that already exist today. Obviously, with GenAI evolving, you're going to see more of that.
So clearly we're going to be forced into this Gen AI era, and no matter what we do about it, I think we talked about some of the benefits that we see with security, just within business growth and advancing. It doesn't matter if we're building security tools or building a better way to sell coffee or sell burritos and hamburgers, right? So, Tim, I know we've talked in the past. What are some challenges that we face? There's supply chain challenges. There are compliance challenges. What are the things that we need to be really aware of when we integrate Gen AI technologies?
Yeah, I'll start with a couple. One, to me, when I think about all this talk about Gen AI, we talk a lot about it from a cybersecurity perspective, but keep in mind that there are other parts of the business that want to use it as well, right? And so this kind of just reminds me of the cloud space way back when. It wasn't us in the security field that said, hey, let's go into the cloud because that'd be really cool, right? It was people that said, we need to go faster and we need to save money. I don't know if anybody ever saves money by going to the cloud, but that was the idea. But that's why we got forced into it. The same way that we didn't want to do multi-cloud, but the business said, hey, we need to do multi-cloud for X reason or another. And then we went into it. And so the same thing is true of Gen AI, right? So the fact is that we are talking about how to use it, but the business out there is also talking about how they want to use it, because while we can use it to save time, they can use it to save time as well. I just saw, and I was reading on Twitter, one of the people that I follow used to be a writer and a copywriter, and they used to do just little pieces of copy, and they eliminated the entire staff of the copywriters except for one person, and that person was the one who could use ChatGPT prompts the best, right? So I think the point that I'm saying there is that the business is going to use it for one reason or another. So we have to figure out how to secure it, and we have to figure out how to secure it quickly, because we don't want to be that long pole in the tent. We don't want to be the security of no. We want to be the enablers who can work with the business, figure out how to secure it, and how to do it quickly so that we can work with them. I think the other challenge that I'll say is going to be the compliance challenge. There will always be. Maybe we're not seeing it as much now. Sometimes the compliance stuff lags as we're starting to see the EU really heat up with DORA and NIS2 and some of those frameworks. We do have GDPR that's been around for a little while, but I think that from a compliance perspective, there will be more and more of an onus on us security folks to be able to include that. I don't know what it will look like yet. Obviously, we've got I forget who it was earlier. I think it was Mandy when they were up here. They talked about the fact that we've got all of these. Every government agency these days seems to be wanting to push their own cybersecurity framework and standards, and so I imagine that same type of thing is happening. Right? If you already look, a lot of MITRE and a lot of the other ones are doing the research now. So I would just say that in the future, compliance is going to be something that we're going to have to stay on top of. It's just going to be another item for our GRC teams to review.
Yeah, I think we've seen new standards out there too, but we don't even really understand the technology yet. So it's interesting to see how many countries that are implementing those. Yeah. Galit, what do you think?
I agree. I agree. We see that the regulatory space is evolving and evolving quick, but those Gen AI applications and risks, they're still very new, and there are no clear to-do list or checklist of what needs to be done. However, as Tim mentioned, I think that privacy regulations are already impacted by the fact that now those applications keep that data and train their models with that data. And now there is another layer of risk that should be addressed. Some analysts already projected that in 2024 we'll see companies that are fined for using applications and not controlling their PIIs in a responsible way enough. So we do see concerns, and that pushes us towards managing our supply chain in a much more effective and maybe tight way. So it's not only about TPRM, but also add the layer of Gen AI risks to that, because that's actually part of the game.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, now we have to look about how we query or prompt data, because that's going to be inputted into a model, a training model, and what it outputs is going to be something that we're going to have to understand what happens next. Okay. Barak, maybe we'll just say, like, if you can touch on that last question, but also, with the time that we have, what are some takeaways, some actions that actually everybody here can actually either implement when they go home, they can think about it now, but something that's really, give me the goods.
Yeah.
Some good stuff here.
Yeah, we hope, and I appreciate the question, John, because I think we all hope that we don't just kind of talk theory, right? And there's some, pragmatical advice or best practices or call to action. You talked about challenges. Again, I'm glad we're jumping because, I tend to agree, right? I think we all know that compliance is lagging. If you look at the history of our space, we're kind of waiting for the big breach, and then the regulators will, to your point, they're going to create good frameworks. Where unfortunately we're kind of waiting for that to happen, and maybe there's things we can do in advance. But other than that, again, I agree. The big thing is another challenge, and it will be a good segue into call to action or some advice. There's gaps today that I think a lot of us know in the security space, but we always felt, it's too difficult for attackers to exploit. So we never really prioritized them, where now they could potentially become the new type of attack vectors of the future. So when we think about some advice, specifically around GenAI and cloud security, one is, again, we highly encourage at CyberArk, I personally, when I meet customers, and most of you do it, right? But we need to get way more sophisticated with red team services, with any type of adversary type exercises, because again, the adversaries don't have regulations. They don't have things to stop them, so they can be more creative and innovative. Again, doing that and starting to understand where the potential gaps, I think, is critical. You'll find a lot just by having someone mess around, right, in your environment, in a controlled environment. That's one. The second thing is, just use GenAI in the organization, create a culture of GenAI in the organization. We're very passionate about it at CyberArk, is to make it part of our day-to-day. Just like we use email and whatever else we use in our day-to-day, GenAI becomes just a basic part of our day-to-day lives. And it means that every employee suddenly understands what it means, and it becomes the operating system, let's say, of the organization. It creates a lot more knowledge. The last thing, and you brought up, I brought up, and Tim mentioned that a little bit as well. We need to start developing a machine identity strategy, right? I'm getting a little more specific, but the future is we're going to have a massive amount of automation and identities, right, that are programmatic and not human, and they will have access to a lot of our data, and we need to make sure we have a strategy, because it's not the same necessarily strategy that we use for a human that we hired through our workforce. Machine identities don't go anywhere, right? They'll stay forever, even after we leave and after we go through the lifecycle management. So that's my third.
No, it's good stuff. Like machine identities, and don't be that breach that impacts how regulators start to react to things. Yeah, fair enough. Galit, what are your last remarks for all of us?
So I think that we want to embrace the usage of GenAI capabilities. Just as Tim said, we don't want to be the no-nos. So with that being said, we need to have control I mean, you can enable, you can provide the ability to move fast when you have everything in place, when you know what applications are being used, when you know what are the risks that you take while using them, when you act, when you know that you can configure or restrict the learning or what is done with your data. So the beginning, the first route is to know, to discover, then to assess, and then finally to manage. And there are tools that can help automate those processes, because that's a very dynamic space. And without an automated tool, it's very difficult to keep in pace and to make sure that you're covered.
I like that. Like, we need to enable what customers are using, what our staff and what the business wants to maintain a competitive advantage over. So perfect. Tim, can you bring us home?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the bringing the culture into your organization is huge. Like, at Lacework, we have meetings that are kind of cross-functional with engineering, with field, sales engineers, just everybody to understand, like, based on what our product is and what it does, where can we use GenAI in the product, right? And we're always having conversations, we're prioritizing. So, like, create that culture and have your little working group to do that. And then the second thing that I'll mention, I'll just kind of throw out maybe a prediction there. And if I'm totally wrong on this, feel free to stop me next year at RSA and make fun of me. But the one thing that I'm the most excited about, I do think that GenAI potentially has the ability to help us solve one of the problems that we have, which is a lot of the data in security. We throw all of the data into a SIM, or we throw all of the data somewhere. And nowadays it's kind of being framed a security data lake, right? That's kind of the next trend. But nobody has been able to really, that I know of, use that security data lake yet. And so I think that when you combine the security data lake concept, where you can throw all of your vulnerabilities and all of your data, combined with GenAI, that's going to give you a lot of ability to understand the data and query. I think both of those two things together could be a really interesting use case for security in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I love that too, because and we had to embrace that culture with cloud, because everybody was using cloud. And as we know, lines of business, executives, engineers, they're going to be using GenAI if they're not already. So a perfect time to embrace the security culture or build that within your organization. So perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
John Galit, Tim Bach, thank you very much.